As the embattled Russian leader heads to New Delhi to meet with Narendra Modi. In this show, we also take a look at the case of a woman from India's Arunachal Pradesh, arbitrarily detained for 18 hours in Shanghai airport.
And then she went on to say, Arunachal, not India, China, your visa not acceptable, your basically passport is invalid. Very confusing moment, obviously, because never heard of that before. We obviously are proud Indian citizens.
The Chinese airline and immigration officials claimed the Indian national's passport was invalid because her place of birth was Arunachal Pradesh, which they say is China's as part of Tibet and not India's. She was only released from the airport after the intervention of Indian consular staff. And with Vladimir Putin heading to India, can he achieve the return of Indian purchases of Russian oil, as Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has implied? How will this visit test Modi's careful balancing act, and how will the Indian leader turn it to his advantage? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ika Vat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Lobsang Sangay, former Central Tibetan Administration President, and Lai Yizong, Prospect Foundation President. A warm welcome to you both to Taiwan Talks. So let's take a listen to what Dmitry Peskov said to Indian journalists ahead of Putin's visit.
To ensure that our purchases enjoy a possibility of guaranteed supplies of oil and oil products. And we're managing that quite successful. We have a deep experience in performing under regime of these illegal sanctions. We have our own technologies in doing that.
Vladimir Putin will arrive in India on Thursday for the first visit in 4 years in a bid to restore defense and oil contracts for Moscow hit by Western sanctions and pressure from Donald Trump. Putin will aim to lean into his personal relationship with Modi to elevate bilateral ties to a, quote, qualitatively new level. So Sikyon, let me come to you first. What do you make of Peskov's comments?
Regarding, gas and oil, I think given the, Trump's imposition of tariff has put India in a tricky position. So they will have to decrease the, buying of gas and oil also from Russia. Primarily, whatever India needs could be bought. But what India has done is, they bought a bit more than necessary, refine it and sold it somewhere else. That has benefited few Indian companies. So with US, India exports about $87 billion of goods and buys around $42 billion of goods. So they already, there's a trade deficit, in favor of India, $45 billion worth of goods. So, having rebalancing this trade agreement with US is more important at the moment than buying extra gas and oil, especially oil, and refine it and sell it somewhere else.
Okay, so you don't think that he will be interested in purchasing oil under sanctions, even though there is a special relationship, though, isn't there, Sikyong, between India and Russia? Russia is a long-time friend.
Yeah, perhaps, India has one of the longest friends of Russia, outside of the Soviet bloc. Clearly, so that way they will try. But I think, India cannot go back to the time when they used to buy 70% of the goods, arms from Russia. Those days are over, I think.
Okay, President Lai, do you think that Modi will be interested in essentially in supporting his friend, Putin? How does it requires some very skillful diplomacy and management of this relationship.
My take probably was a little bit different from the Lobsang. I would say that the recent India-US relationship is actually going downhill due to the fact not just because of the US sanction on India and purchasing Russian oil, but also the United States is receiving the Pakistan army chief, as well as the President Trump his own call about what he played in terms of the Indian-Pakistan conflict, as well as what Indian term as an anti-terrorism war, but the President Trump basically called it's a two-state conflict between two states. So the Indians' perspective is that the United States relation is going downhill, and they have the China to manage, so that they wouldn't rely on Russia more rather than less. And in order to rely on Russia more, they wanted to make Russia less dependent on China. And one of the way that we want to do is actually to improve the Indian-Russian relationship, purchasing more weapons and purchasing more the oil or other natural gas. I think that will be part of the calculations.
But will that not trigger a fresh reaction from Trump, which they're seeking to avoid?
I will say that the Indians probably will believe that the relation with Trump and also the confidence about the United States is already going down. Although they will try to avoid the further escalation from the President Trump. So about how much they want to purchase from Russia and the cooperation, how much will they go, they will probably calibrate it to the degree not to offend Trump too much. But the direction is to intensify the cooperation with Russia, not less.
Now, moving to China-India ties, despite their historic normalization of ties after 5 years, Beijing has now provoked Delhi's anger over India's Arunachal Pradesh, which China calls South Tibet. Watch.
Yesterday we made a statement, you would have seen that, regarding the arbitrary detention of an Indian citizen from Arunachal Pradesh who was holding a valid passport and was transiting through Sangay International Airport on an onward travel to Japan. We want to say that Arunachal Pradesh is an integral and inalienable part of India, and this is a fact which is self-evident. No amount of denial by the Chinese side is going to change this indisputable reality. At the same time, I said that we did take up this matter. We did do a strong démarche with the Chinese side, both in Beijing and in Delhi, when the incident took place.
And this is the Indian traveller Pema Thongdok again.
And there was about 3 or 4 airline staff of China Eastern and about 2 other immigration officers, and all of them were basically speaking in their language and saying and pointing out and saying Arunachal, Arunachal, and laughing and calling it China, no India.
Now, Beijing says it does not accept the British McMahon Line, which delineates the boundary between Tibet and India's Arunachal Pradesh. From 1913 to 1914, Foreign Secretary of British India Henry McMahon led 8 meetings with representatives from Tibet and China, then the ROC, in Simla and in Delhi to decide the boundary between British India and Tibet, as well as Tibet and China. Tibet was represented by Longchen Chatra, a leading Prime Minister of Tibet at the time, and the ROC China by Yifan Chen. Finally, the ROC refused to sign the final Simla Convention. It also alleged that Tibet was not a sovereign state at the time and didn't have the capacity to sign conventions. However, before these negotiations, after the fall of the Qing dynasty in China, the Tibet government at Lhasa had already expelled all Chinese forces and unilaterally declared itself independent in 1913. President Lai, let me come to you first. So before we get into the issue of sovereignty, the ROC Taiwan government has, in recent times, referred to Arunachal Pradesh as Indian territory. Why is that the case, given the ROC's history?
I think that basically means that ROC Taiwan government would like to see that this is an issue between India and China, rather than between ROC Taiwan and India. And so that about the recognizing the Arunachal Pradesh as part of the India, that basically means that the ROC Taiwan government look at these issues more in line that how they think about the LAC line of actual control has to be recognized and respected.
Okay, and obviously there's been a huge change to Taiwan, to ROC, since that time, the democratic change.
If you think that the ROC Taiwan is a continuation of ROC in China, I think probably a lot of people will be mistaken. So I would just stop at that.
Okay. Si-Kyung, so what can we say about the PRC's claim to Arunachal Pradesh and even to Tibet? You know, and how does that differ or align with its claim on East Turkestan, Xinjiang?
As you briefly described the history, in 1914, the similar agreement was signed between British India and Tibet, and in which they, on the sideline, they also demarcated the border, and which is called McMahon Line, which is the preferred border of India. And because Tibet signed it, Tibetan government exile, we are obligated to follow. So that in that context, Arunachal Pradesh or Taiwan is part of India. So which China calls, South Tibet. In another context, they also say the Dalai Lamas were never born outside of China, right? So one Dalai Lama, fourth, was born in Mongolia, so which is Inner Mongolia. So technically it's occupied, but under China. But now Taiwan is outside of China. It's in India. So making that claim, there's additional reason for that as well. Each time India tries to renew relationship with China, there's always a step back because China does it. In 1979, Indian Foreign Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to China, and the Vietnam War, China sent Vietnam War, and then there was renewed relationship between India and China in 2015, and then the Doklam incident happened. And in 2019, another renewed relationship with Modi and Xi Jinping met in India. And then the Galwan Valley happened where 13 Indian soldiers were killed and 100 were injured, right? So each time India takes a step to, normalize relationship with China, China sends a message saying, we are the elder brother, we will do what we want to do. So in this case, how they treated, a woman from Arunachal Pradesh is a case in point after a recent visit by Modi to China after 7 years.
And President Lai, what's your take on this incident? Do you believe it's an isolated case, or does it happen all the time? It just simply doesn't make, the media.
It definitely is not an isolated case, because about 10, 12 years ago, similar thing also happened. There are Indian delegation to China, and then I think there are 2 or 3 of them. They carry passport, and the China border control look at them. Suddenly found out they come from Arunachal Pradesh, and then they refused to put a visa on there because they said you are Chinese citizens, so you don't need a visa to go to China. So that is the.
So they accepted the passport.
Well, they just said you're a Chinese citizen, so you do not need a visa. Okay, so that is the way that the Chinese continue to insist on, as it is when you're in China that you have to respect Chinese law, and this is what Chinese law requires. And you enter China, if you are born in these places, no, you're a Chinese citizen. And end of the story. Yeah.
Right. And Sikyong, the Chinese have started talking about Okinawa, Ryukyu, claiming that it's not Japanese. Does this have implications for Japanese who come from Okinawa in terms of transiting through or traveling to China? And how about for Taiwanese as well?
Yeah. Chinese government, they're very good at reinventing, history, For example, they used to say Tibet was part of China since 13th century, and they gave whole historical facts. Chinese historians disputed that, and then they went back all the way to 7th century. They said 7th and 8th century Tibet became part of China. Again, Chinese historians disputed that. Now what they say is Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. And same thing they say with Arunachal, same thing Taiwan. So they just had this line, So, this is classic, colonial and also expansionist policy, And so, because I always say this, Great Wall of China it took 1,000 years to build that. And that was the border between China and the northern neighbors, right? Mongolian and Manchurians, all that, So that's for 4,900 years, that's the border. Now they have crossed over the Great Wall. If you ask them, so for 4,000 plus years, you said the Great Wall, it was the border. Now what happened is that now it has changed. Since when? Since ancient times. So that's how they, they think they can get away with this, So
but is it a message, though, do you think? Is it a signal? You talked about how India takes a step forward, and then always there is the conflict or the confrontation.
Yes. She was going on a vacation to Japan. She would just stop over, the Shanghai airport, right? What's the big deal? Let her pass. Just to detain her, to embarrass her, to make this an issue.
A diplomatic issue.
It's a deliberate attempt on the part of Chinese government to send a message to India and also to, around the world. The fact that Modi visited recently, right? And then Wang Yi and, Jaishankar met recently, given all this political development taking place, one tourist passing by Shanghai airport, it's not a big deal, let her go, but then insistent to make it a point. It's always to poke a finger. Yeah.
President Lai, I mean, China is the first country to weaponize tourism, tell its citizens, if it was the reverse case, not to travel to India. Should India tell its citizens not to travel to China because there is this risk?
I do not know about the Indian government's position right now, but I will say that it seems that Indians' interest in going into China right now is much reduced. So if the Indian government decided to reinstate restrictions, I do not think that it will receive much of the resistance within Indian society. That's my observation.
Okay. Now, China has built a vast infrastructure network of road, rail and airports across Tibet to connect it to China. But the speed and scale of the projects only really accelerated since 1999 when China launched its Go West campaign. And in September, Beijing inaugurated a high-altitude drone testing facility near Shichenghe in Nagari Prefecture at over 4,300 meters above sea level, complete with a 720-meter runway. So, Sikyong, I want to ask you, what does this transport network, what does the drone testing facility in Tibet, what does this mean for China, for India, for Tibet?
We always talk about, and which is true, there's a great threat about Taiwan. Taiwan being the spotlight. It could be the island or the nation where China might invade or there might be conflict. But I always fear that, and say this, that India could be, equally, targeted by China. Primarily because to be number one in the world, you have to be number one in the region. To be number one in the region, you must make sure that there is no number two, or number two should be distant number two, right? And in Asia, if you look at, India has that makeup demographically, economically, to be the number one, number two. So just to make sure that India is fully contained, all this infrastructure developments taking place. Railway line from Golmut to Lhasa to Nyitri, from Chengdu to Nyitri, and then from Xinjiang to Nyitri, and then 4-lane, 6-lane highways, and then military airfield in Nyitri. Now they're building one in Ngari, which is across, Galwan Valley, Ladakh, right? So clearly they are prepared, wars are won or lost based on, supply lines. So supply chain. So they are already preparing, and they have built 300, artificial villages across border line as well. So China is fully preparing, right? And from India's side, I always urge in India to build more infrastructure on India's side as well. So clearly they are flexing their muscle and showcasing that we are better prepared infrastructure-wise than India.
President Lai, do you agree with that assessment? It's not just defensive; it's actually offensive.
I think although China would like to be the expansionist, but right now the war talk or the attention is actually still on Taiwan and also the eastern seashore. The India to China is that I want to prevent you to be the good number two. I'm always the number one. I'm going to work with Pakistan to contain you, but. About being offensive against India, I do not think China is that is in Chinese mind. And if you look at the Galawan incidents, where not only 20 Indian soldiers lost their life, but also they are like a double the kind of number of Chinese soldiers who lost their lives. It is Chinese side. They want India to compartmentalize this issue. And it's the Indian side continue to insist that unless you deal with the Galawan issues, and there's no normalization between India and China. So I will say that the very different attitude when China facing Japan, Taiwan, for example, where everything is about sovereignty and the military will be the number one, and nothing will get normalized. But the Indian, Chinese, and attitude toward India is very different. So I will say that the attention toward the military is still on Taiwan, and to a certain extent in South China Sea. But India is still not even in the top two in the Chinese strategic calculations there.
Sikyong, I mean, is it also for Tibet, though, not just perhaps a greater standard of living, better transport, easier to move around, but is it, accelerating the assimilation of Tibet into China?
Yes, infrastructure, obviously Tibetans use it, but more so the Chinese migrants use it, right? And then the Chinese mining companies use it, and Chinese officials use it more. So if you have to weigh the weigh who is benefiting more, clearly Han Chinese and Han Chinese officials, and then Han Chinese owned mining companies and factories are benefiting more, because Tibet has a lot of natural resources, critical minerals, and 75% lithium reserve of China is in Tibet, 90% of rare earth of China is in Inner Mongolia, so on and so forth. So clearly, this infrastructure helps them build that as well. Now, if I may just add one point, the origin of rise of China was there's old saying that which is now popularly cited: Tibet is the palm. You occupy Tibet and go after 5 fingers, Ladakh, Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim, and Arunachal. Why? You go after 5 fingers, he who dominates Himalayas will dominate South Asia. Not just in Pakistan. China is in Nepal, Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka. So containing India is their primary focus. Because to be number one, you have to make sure the number 2 is nowhere near. There is never going to be a good number 2. You have to make sure, like in America, to rise to become number 1. Mexico and Canada is nowhere near. No one sees Mexico and Canada as challenging. India, if you look at First World War, Second World War, why, Russia, Britain, Germany, there was contention, was making sure there's no number 2. That's why all this, wars happened. So China's biggest concern is if they went on to rise to become number 1, if there is a conflict, even on Taiwan, they have to make sure that, behind my back, number 2 will not take me over, So that way, I think, if you look at the infrastructure development, that's why they spend so much. From India's side, not much is happening. So that's why it's more offensive preparation infrastructure-wise.
Okay. So meanwhile, in July, Washington restored $6.8 million in funding for Tibetan communities as the Dalai Lama turns 90 years old. This comes as the Trump administration has slashed nearly all of the funding for US aid and other international development programs. The US's Tibet policy is grounded on a few different acts, including the Resolve Tibet Act of 2024 and the Tibetan Policy Act of 2002. In particular, the Resolve Tibet Act of 2024 affirms that the dispute between Tibet and China is unresolved and urges China to engage in dialogue with Tibetan leaders without preconditions. With respect to the Dalai Lama, the act imposes sanctions on Chinese officials who interfere in the succession of Tibetan leaders. It also affirms the Tibetan people's right to self-determination under the United Nations. President Lai, let me ask you, this was significant for Trump to do a U-turn on this funding for Tibet, even though the dollar amount perhaps wasn't that great. Do you think, in our final question, can Tibet count on US support, especially as they go through the succession of the Dalai Lama?
I have to say, I don't know. But at least the Trump administration about President Trump signing this act and the choose not to deny it, that means that Trump does not see the Tibet issue as a problem between him and Xi Jinping. So I think that will be the good sign. And it's not like Taiwan, where Xi Jinping took Taiwan to the voluntarily go to the Trump and demanding Trump to do something. But Xi Jinping is not bringing the Tibet issue to the Trump. So that for him to sign this also means that the United States continue to pay attention to what's happening in Tibet. I think that's also at least a good sign. Although we do not know to how much that the U.S., especially the Trump administration, would like to pay attention to the Tibet, because we do know the Trump administration basically ignore the democratic value and the human rights value as a part of diplomacy. But at least in the Tibet issues, they are willing to do something. So I think that at least that's a positive.
Sekyung, you said that Tibet is part of China's offensive strategy towards India. So should Xi Jinping, should China be more worried about US support?
For Tibetans?
For Tibet,
yeah, they have always, worried about Tibet. That's why, China has published 13 white papers on Tibet. Compared to Hong Kong or Xinjiang or East Turkestan, even on Taiwan. So that shows that why they have to justify their presence 13 times means they are worried, because we have government exile, we have His Holiness Dalai Lama, and we have bipartisan support and the grassroots support around the world. So yes, Chinese government is worried. At the moment, it's true. Taiwan is the flashpoint, and it should be. But I'm pretty sure, in their discussion, Tibet issue will come up. Not necessarily in the top 1 or 2, but it will come up. But I'm more worried, in Taiwan will be the issue that will come up between Xi Jinping and Trump. And we hope that U.S. administration will stay firm and then, not budge towards the demand of Xi Jinping. Yeah.
Yes, everybody hopes so. We'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Lobsang Sangay, for joining Taiwan Talks, and also President Lai for returning. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.